it's really just a chance to catch up with each other, not only around this topic, but things that may spin off for that. So Laura, if you just
Mhm.
want to jump
Well,
in and share whatever. Oh, Christina.
Oh, I just want to point out, Daniel reminded me that we should record this, so I just hit the record button. So just so everybody
Gotcha.
knows. Thanks.
Okay.
Sorry for the interruption.
Super. Okay. I'm going to go on mute in case there's a dog barking in the background.
Yeah, and since I work with most of you other than Bernie, I think Bernie, feel free to shoot out questions, or if there's anything specific that you would like to get out of the conversation today. It's real no agenda on my part, but I guess just a little bit of background. So I manage the Farmland Protection Program, both internally for the Conservancy and as a contractor to several local programs that are in place throughout our region. Both Peninsula Township and Acme Township and Grand Traverse County have funded purchase of development right programs through millages they passed. So I am actively working in those townships and managing those programs as well. And farmland preservation really has been a priority for the Conservancy since we were founded in 1991. We see as protecting farmland as really protecting the factory floor of farming. We can't have successful agribusinesses if those farmers don't have land to farm on. And we also see it as a great tool for succession and keeping the farms viable into the next generations. And like I said, we not only have the goal of protecting farming, we've also kind of shifted into protecting farming and land access issues, and getting into a little bit more of the issues that surround the land access and viability, as far as creating new conservation easement terms to remain flexible for future generations, and exploring some additional tools to implement in our conservation easements to make it more affordable for the next generation. So we're really starting to develop more of a farming protection plan at the Conservancy, and how we keep farmers on farmland, because as you know, we have a huge influx of people coming up here with second homes, and once we protect the farm, it doesn't necessarily mean that they have to sell it to a farmer or keep it in active agriculture. And we have a lot of people coming up here that want the estate size lots and are still out competing farmers for already protected farmland. So we're looking at kind of tools to help make sure that this remains in productive ag and available to farmers that need it. I guess as far as the succession goes, just a little bit of background about conservation easements is, if you're not familiar how they're valued and why they are such a great succession tool, is we take the fair market value versus minus the restricted value. That's what the conservation easement value is worth, or the development rights is worth. So in most cases, a protected farm is less expensive, more affordable to the next generation because of those restrictions. A lot of times we work with what's called a conservation buyer, or a farmer coming in that has identified a piece of property that they want, whether it's a family property or another farm that they know that landowner doesn't have a identified successor. And they'll work with that farmer and us to buy the development rights from the original landowner, and then do a simultaneous sale to the new buyer, the new farmer. So that original landowner is getting the fair market value because they're getting the development right value, plus then selling the farm right away restricted. So that original landowner has a peace of mind of, selling it to a farmer and knowing that it's going to remain active farmland, as well as getting the fair market value out of the farm. So we're doing a lot of those type of transactions lately where those simultaneous transactions with conservation buyers or new farmers. They're mostly younger farmers that typically just can't afford unrestricted farmland up here, especially when you're looking at like Peninsula Township that is selling farmland for $40,000 an acre. That's not really feasible for most people, let alone farmers. So yeah, taking those development rights from the property and placing those restrictions on the property typically devalues the property and making it a little bit more affordable for that next generation to come in while remaining flexible for agriculture. Things like placing agricultural infrastructure, agribusinesses, processing facilities, anything like that is typically allowed on a protected farm. So we try to work with especially that next generation on seeing their goals of the property and what they have planned. These are in perpetuity once they're placed on the property. So it can be really intimidating for a landowner, a new buyer, to think that way, that these restrictions are forever. And so we really try to emphasize planning and talking to accountants and legal counselors or MSU educators on business planning, things like that, to remain flexible so they can still have a successful and viable farm business into the future, or be able to sell it in the future too, but also meet our requirements and potentially IRS requirements and things like that. But I'll kind of stop there and pause and see if anyone has any questions specifically on conservation easements or kind of our work at the Conservancy.
Laura, I'm kind of curious to know what you wish people knew about the work that you did. Because I think if people aren't totally enmeshed in it or are really paying attention, it's easy to have misconceptions about these types of arrangements or agreements. And so I'm curious from your perspective, like, what do you wish people knew about what you do?
Well, I think as far as like the general public, I think a lot of perceptions is that we're just paying farmers to keep doing what they're doing. I don't think a lot of people realize what they're giving up in regards to selling their development rights, especially in really high pressure development areas. They could be selling their property to a development or developer and getting a lot higher value than probably what they're getting out of their development rights or the price of the conservation easement. And also, it's an investment into the future, I think, too, when people contribute funds to a project, or in some cases, the millages that are taxpayer funded. A one-time payment to a farmer can mean a lifetime of investment for that property. Typically, we see farmers reinvest that money right back into the farm, whether it's an infrastructure or replanting new crops, things like that, or they're using it to pass down to the next generation as a succession tool. So you see a lot of benefits for a lot longer period of time with the sale of development rights, rather than selling the property one time off to a developer. That money is typically lost in that first generation. Whereas when the farmer invests the money from development rights, it's usually seen from multiple generations on. And then as far as like the agricultural side of it, some people's maybe misperceptions of it is, that these restrictions that we're going to be policing them, or, that we're restricting agriculture in any way, or they're not going to be able to build out their business or pass it down to the next generation. I think a lot of people have hesitations to that because it's in perpetuity. And every conservation easement's tailored to the property and the individual landowner goals. So we really try to remain, flexible as much as possible. Not that, the entire property doesn't need to be encumbered by the conservation easement. We can always exclude areas so that we give the landowner a little bit more flexibility, things like that. So there's a lot of ways to work around, individual landowner goals. I think the biggest issue that we face, I would say we have a little bit more demand up here, just because we do have a lot of successful programs and people that have participated in these programs. So I'd say we have more demand than what we have funding. Typically, most of our agricultural conservation easements are purchased. Some are donated, but most cases are purchased or a combination of what we call a bargain sale. So there's a donation component to it, but it's really a funding issue for us. There are some federal programs that we utilize, but most of our funding comes from private contributions still. There's a state program that local municipalities can use, but we really have to prioritize farms based on, unfortunately, where the funding is and whether they're eligible for these programs. So, not everyone does have the opportunity to get full market value out of their farm from the conservation value. So that's kind of important to know, that we only work with willing landowners as a voluntary program, but there's also the funding side of it if that's what they need out of the program.
Right. I have maybe some logistic questions. I noticed right as COVID was hitting that I don't know if it was you guys or Leelanau Conservancy was awarded a portion of from the Michigan Agricultural Preservation Fund, some funding dollars. I think the total award for all the different entities was about 2 million or something, but obviously you guys didn't get 2 million. That would have been lovely.
Yeah, we did. We actually did get, if the federal program that we work with Leelanau County, we've gotten that we were awarded in 2016, we got 2.9 million through that program. And then we just got awarded an additional 5-year award through that. So another $1 million. And that's just for our conservancy. The only issue is that only provides 50% of the funds.
Right.
So we either need to match that with bringing money to the table, or that can come from a landowner donation as well.
Okay. So that Michigan Ag Preservation, what is it called? Board, the fund board. Can those, are those truly state dollars that could match federal dollars? Or I'm just, maybe we're getting into the weeds here, but I was just curious.
Those, you can match state and federal dollars, but the only problem is the state program only funds eligible municipal programs. So the conservancies are not eligible for state dollars, only like Acme Township and Peninsula Township that have eligible programs. So they have ordinances and things like that on record, are eligible for that Michigan program. Okay. And that program, which Acme Township did get funded last year. They received almost $500,000 for that program
Okay.
for one of their projects. But that program has been unfunded for the last 10 or so years. 2019 was the first year that they had a grant application. So that was pretty big. There was only, I think, less than $2 million available statewide, which is not a lot. It's a pretty competitive program. They did have a grant cycle this year as well. But yeah, you can match that with federal dollars. And then, like I said, a landowner donation can also be used as match.
So the 2020 application cycle is already
I
through?
think they're due that, yeah, so we received, I think technically it was a 2020 cycle. Acme Township received the money, and then this new cycle, I think, is due at the end of the month.
Okay, gotcha. Does anybody have any, speculation if, given the state of the state's economy and et cetera, whether the 2021 money might be there or not? I mean, given that, yeah, this is only the second year that they were even able to
Yeah, it's really hard to tell, especially with, a lot of funds being redirected with COVID relief. It'll be interesting to see if that sticks around.
Right.
Those funds aren't really protected in comparison to the federal program that is all funded through the 2018 Farm Bill. Like, those funds are already obligated to us, so those are very protected and locked in. The state program is something that we really need to increase support for. Traditionally, it's been a very great resource for a lot of programs. It's a pretty easy program to work through. It's pretty streamlined, and it gives a lot of kind of flexibility to the entity that's applying, whereas the federal program is just very, very cumbersome to work through. It can take 2 to 3 years to close on a project through the federal program because of all the red tape and hoops you have to go through. But it's a really solid funding source. So you kind of have your trade-offs there. But the state program, just the fact of, how important agriculture is to our state, it's been very under-supported. That fund specifically, I know they really emphasize their PA 116 program, which is a kind of a temporary protection, gives tax relief. That's been a really successful program. But as far as their permanent protection programs, it could do a lot better.
Gotcha.
The American Farmland Trust actually just released a report called State of the States, and it analyzed every state's farmland protection, tools and the support they give to farmland protection. And Michigan scored kind of right in the middle, and within the 50 states, which is not surprising because we do have things like the PA 116 program. But then you look at states like Maryland and Vermont and some of the states out east that just have very robust programs, not just with permanent conservation easements, but a lot of other tax relief programs and other support that gives the agricultural businesses.
Gotcha. And it, I know this from, unfortunately, what didn't happen in my county, Charlevoix County. Having that county program in place is absolutely imperative to access those funds if and when, there are funds. And sadly, some years ago, actually my dad worked on it, so it's been some years, Charlevoix County passed a policy, the authorizing policy, whatever, countywide, to institute that kind of a countywide program. And then when, as the story goes, when the one farmer on the Board of Commissioners took his maybe once in a lifetime trip to Florida that following winter, they rescinded the vote. And Charlevoix County has no farmland preservation.
It's similar to what I dealt with in Elk Rapids and Milton Township last year. We had failed millage votes there that we worked on, and yeah, it's tough. I mean, you see the successes in Peninsula and Acme Township. I mean, Peninsula Township would look completely different if that program didn't pass in 1994. It is protected over 50% of the agricultural land base there, over 5,000 acres of farmland protection, which has been leveraged, through the Conservancy and, state and federal programs. So typically when you get those tax funded programs, they're matched with, these other funding sources. So it really leverages the taxpayer dollars.
My other question is kind of a logistics thing too, and maybe you haven't done enough deals, this year to really have a feel for this, Laura. But I know in my neck of the woods, the I will almost say hyperinflation of land prices, housing stock specifically, but in 2020 has been like unprecedented. I mean, you can't even get an appraiser to, they're so backed up. Some of them aren't even answering their phone anymore. And obviously that's going to have an impact for who knows how long as we become known and more desirable as a place in the country to move to. So that,
yeah,
it's got to impact yeah.
For sure. Actually, I wrote an ag forum on this right at the beginning of COVID, how this could really have major implications with people, moving out of cities and wanting more space and kind of these retreats in the state-like properties. And that's why I mentioned that we're kind of working on and exploring tools that we could implement, because just because a property has a conservation easement on it or is already protected doesn't necessarily mean they have to sell it to a farmer or has to stay in active agriculture. So farmers are still getting outbid on properties that are already protected. And it's really driving the restricted farm prices up. We're actually seeing a lot of our recent appraisals is that the before value, so unrestricted fair market values of prices, are actually staying for big lots. It's actually staying pretty stable. It's not increasing that much, but restricted prices are going up. So that makes the easement value less. Because there's not that much of a difference anymore. People are more willing to buy those restricted farms. So there's tools such as like option to purchase at ag value that some land trusts are starting to implement, where it's basically a restriction within the conservation easement that it forces them to sell it at an agricultural appraised value when it becomes time to sell. That obviously makes the easement more expensive for the land trust or the entity buying it, because it makes it more restrictive. But it allows, that kind of land access, addressing the land access issues. There's other tools like affirmative language that, again, enforces the landowner to remain in active agriculture and an active farm, things like that. So we aren't implementing those yet, but kind of starting to explore what we can do a little bit more to make sure that these farms stay in the hands of farmers.
Right.
And obviously up here, we do have a different agriculture model that we're kind of moving towards, especially in Leelanau and Peninsula Township, where, a lot of people are buying farms that aren't necessarily farmers, but then hiring out management companies or another farmer to manage the property,
Right.
which isn't necessarily a bad thing. It, provides a job, agricultural related jobs. It allows that farm to stay in agriculture, protects, the other conservation values associated with it, scenic views and habitat and things like that. So I'm not saying it's necessarily bad, bad that people are buying up farms. But like I said, we have a lot of people that want to, get into farming or have that, land access issue that it's probably one of the biggest hurdles for new and beginning farmers. So we just want to be able to make sure we're addressing those needs as well.
Mm-hmm. Right. Always lots to do.
Laura, do you feel like, so this happened, I was looking at a property out in Antrim, near Quaden, and it's right near Waterfire Vineyard, and it was about 40 acres, and I had been looking at it with my family, and what ended up happening is the realtor decided to buy it and is going to parcel it off into 10-acre lots or smaller for housing. And I feel like we're seeing this a lot more up here, even from the time I've lived here. Are you seeing that with some of the farms that can't get protected quick enough, or people aren't willing to go into a easement agreement, that kind of thing? Are you seeing that more, do you feel like, in current years?
It's interesting. Again, American Farmland Trust released their kind of a Farms Under Threat 2.0 last year.
Mm-hmm.
And it's made me think of it because you mentioned like the 10-acre lots. Is I think up here we saw a threat of like the big developments going in on farmland, and we weren't really accounting for kind of the low density, more rural type lots that cause a lot of fragmentation. It's difficult but we also have this like new wave of like small farms up here. So it's hard to balance out like the fragmentation lots that are like 10 acres being sold for development, but also like someone like a new farmer might only want 10 acres to farm on. And a lot of our conservation easements are really are restrictive on subdivision language, where we wouldn't allow a 10-acre split or even 20. Usually it's, 40s, 80s, things like that. We want to remain the bigger lot sizes. So it's kind of balancing out that, but I would say yes and no. I mean, we still have a lot of demand. I definitely, see more for sale signs on farms, but those have been on the market for a while. I don't see a lot of movement yet up here. We'll see if that changes.
Mm-hmm.
I think it really depends on your location too. I mean, we obviously serve 5 counties. So, comparing like a Peninsula Township is a little different than some of our other service areas.
This is
That's
only
why.
sorry.
Ahead,
This is only
Daniel.
tangential, but I just wanted to dig into that Farmland Under Threat report that you mentioned, because as you've been describing this work, I've had rolling in the back of my mind those report findings, which root all of these amazing efforts in some present urgency around not accelerating climate change, at least, and that low density development was found in that report to be one of the major like agriculture or like land-based contributors to climate change right now. So it's just super interesting. It's just kind of this silent threat of convenience and consumption, which is actually greater than even like some of the vices of industrial agriculture in terms of their climate impacts.
Yeah, it's interesting, like lot sizes, I think you see that in zoning too. I mean, when Peninsula Township developed their zoning ordinance, back in like the 70s, they zoned agriculture like 5-acre lot sizes, which they thought would protect farmland, because they're like, no one's going to want a 5-acre lot. And, that's just a big lawn to mow. And now we're seeing like that trend. Obviously, people want like the bigger lot sizes. And we didn't really think of the fragmentation issues and things like that could be a threat to our agricultural land base up here. So we're starting to look at that a little bit more. But again, on the flip side of that, it's hard when you're drafting conservation easements with landowners that have a 100-acre, 200-acre farm, and you want to remain, viable into the future, and also be accessible for newer and beginning farmers, and what subdivision or lot sizes might look like into the future. So it's a balancing act for sure.
Mm-hmm.
And that's the hard thing about conservation easements. I mean, like I said, we've only been around since 1991. And when we look at our conservation easements that we drafted when we first got started, we've evolved a lot. And we're constantly learning. And that's, I think, the hardest thing I deal with as being a practitioner is, I don't want to look at a conservation easement that I drafted today in 20 years and be like, man, what was I thinking? What was I thinking? Like we're trying to stay ahead of the curve as far as conservation easement drafting and making sure that we're working again with the landowners and meeting their goals, and these are in perpetuity, so we're trying to draft accordingly to that. So it can be a challenge.
Yeah, absolutely. Hard to anticipate where the where the pinch points are going to be, as evidenced by this year, even a few years in the future, let alone decades in the future. So
yeah, and I was just on a call last week. Kind of another challenge we're facing is how to deal with like agritourism in our conservation easements, given kind of the commercial uses of them. Typically, commercial and industrial uses are prohibited in conservation easements. And so where's that line of agritourism and commercial? Like when is it no longer farming and just straight commercial? And it's really not well defined. Agritourism, a farm market where they're selling the products can easily be related back to an agritourism or agribusiness enterprise. But when it becomes, a winery or something that has parking lots and lights and large events and weddings and things like that, that could potentially have an adverse effect on the conservation values of, which was the reason why we protected the farm in the first place. We kind of have to start rethinking those type of uses and how to potentially restrict those. And that's why I said, we're kind of moving towards excluding areas from our easement areas. So then they have a little bit more flexibility if they want to do something more commercial in the future. And then we don't have to enforce it.
Yeah. Laura, does that act as like the envelope like the building envelopes, or is it
It
just
would
totally
be
separate?
completely outside of the easement area, so we would have no control over it, which also has some risk
Mhm.
as far as like perception and things like that of from the outside. But yeah, that way we just don't have to deal with interpretation of easement terms and enforcement issues down the road.
Well, I'm sure happy to hear that at least that conversation is occurring, because of the clients that I see, the biggest demand driver, I guess I'd say at this point, are, real farms, active farms,
Mm-hmm.
wanting to add some kind of agritourism component.
Mm-hmm.
And, it just doesn't, of course, impact the area of, of farmland preservation, but it has lots of other issues surrounding that. So
Sure.
I'm trying to get my colleagues to dust off and once again get out into the state a curriculum that was developed in 2019 that really helps not only farmers, but the audience actually primarily is township officials, township and county officials that are cultivating new farm economies is the name of it. And it's been taught in Traverse City and in Petoskey last fall, or fall of 2019, but to really start to educate around these issues of agritourism and how they, and Laura's been a speaker at that to talk about the farmland preservation component of it. So it's really, really a big deal for people that I'm doing business counseling with right now.
Yeah, agritourism, alternative energy siting, basically anything that's going to bring in either offset costs or bring in income to the farm is kind of what we're seeing a lot of. And again, I mean, like I said, we just, Wendy, we were talking yesterday, is we closed on the Rocky Top farm, which is obviously a very, agritourism kind of destination, where they even have, camping and events and things like that. And we were able to work around terms, and we did end up excluding areas because it just wasn't compatible with kind of our goals and their goals. But we were able to piece it together and come to a final plan to make it work. So we definitely can accommodate those type of activities.
Yeah.
Laura, do you think that's helping get more people on board with it?
I think so, especially the newer generation that probably has some of these bigger ideas. So yeah, trying to get that kind of message across of flexibility and things like that.
Yeah, and I think that's where continuing with that partnership, Laura, with MSU or other entities that want to educate on that, because agritourism doesn't always look like event barn with 250 people every Saturday night in the summer. I mean, I've worked with farmers that have been told by their local township that if they wanted to have a farm to table dinner inside of their empty hoop house, because it was that time of the year that their hoop house happened to be empty, that was going to be looked at as commercial activity on their farm, when really it was just a nice little idea to say thank you to their patrons. This is Bear Creek Township in Emmett County. And so there's all sorts of levels of land use, and intensity when it comes to agritourism. The event barns, the wedding barns, they get, that's where the most controversy lies. But it can be it's getting to be, from where I sit anyway, more restrictive on, by the entity that does the planning and zoning. They're scrutinizing things that even 5 or certainly 10 years ago wouldn't have even been an issue.
Yeah, I mean, planning and zoning is a whole nother
Yeah. that's a whole
discussion
nother-
we could have.
We can have another
and-
coffee chat
Yeah,
about it.
and typically our conservation easements have to be in compliance with local, state, and federal zoning. Again, we serve a big service area, so every township is different in that regard. But we can kind of usually rely on zoning to take care of some of the restrictions that we might not explicitly state in our easements.
Right.
But again, when you compare like a Peninsula Township to a Banks Township, they're completely different. So we can't always use that as a fallback. And zoning can change, master plans change. So it's not, permanent restrictions or protections. So yeah, the zoning thing's a whole nother animal.
I spent lots of hours at local zoning meetings, planning commission meetings the past couple of years. It's
And that's what we don't want to ever turn into is,
right.
People to view us as like a zoning administrator. Like our easements, we monitor once a year. We have a responsibility to enforce and monitor the easement terms. But we don't really want to go in and, be the people that, oh, you're having a table, a farm dinner in your barn, like the uses and things like that. We try to stay away from. We're focusing on, protecting the conservation values and the main purposes of the easement, and things that aren't detrimental to those we typically allow. So.
Right. I want it, for those of you who don't have your chat window open, I put in the link to the AFT's State of the States in the chat. And if you need me to send it to you, otherwise I'm happy to do that as well. You can find it pretty easily on AFT's site.
They're rolling out a lot of great tools. AFT, American Farmland Trust, is really ramped up in the last 2 years since their new president came in. AFT did a lot of work here, like Wendy said, in the 80s, 90s to get a lot of these local programs up and running. And then they kind of they took a different direction for a while. And now they're really refocusing their work, and they're really rolling out some great things, great reports. They have a national land network now with all like the land trusts and local units of government and coordinating those efforts. And so check them out.
Awesome.
Yeah, the other one, Laura, I thought of was new entries, new toolkit that they put together. And what I think it's like, I listened to a webinar on it yesterday, but chapter 5 like focuses a lot on succession, which I thought was interesting. I forget the lady who presented it, but she was really
was it Susanna?
I think maybe it might have
they
been.
have a whole land access curriculum that they developed, and they're also doing train the trainers. Pre-COVID, we had thought of hosting a workshop that they would come, like they have trainers throughout the country that could implement these. We were thinking about in regards to like the farmer to farmer and setting up a land farm link. So yeah, they have that whole kind of side of it. They have the farmland protection side of it. So they're doing a lot of work right now.
Yeah, we would be remiss if we didn't mention farmer to farmer. And even though it's been through its challenges recently, it is still
there. I mean,
exists.
unfortunately, I mean, we didn't receive that grant with Michigan State University Extension in March, and since then, I think with COVID and just with the partners having to for me, I just hadn't been able to prioritize it and since that. I actually have a call next week though with someone from Ottawa County. She runs their Farmland Preservation Program on kind of revisiting the goals of what that Michigan State University grant that they applied for, that the beginning farmer and rancher grant, as far as getting a statewide website up and running, because I think that would bring in more investment as far as like a coordinating body and things like that. So I'm going to revisit it. Unfortunately, I've just been swamped with other things, and so that's been kind of sitting unattended to lately, which needs to be refreshed for sure.
Yeah, well, that's good to hear. And Laura knows that I'll add that Washtenaw County also reached out to Farmer committee in a year ago anyway, talking about maybe that same type of a statewide program. So we've all had to put a lot of things on pause this year that were priorities before this year. So we'll get back there in some way, shape, or form. I see that we're at 9, and I just want to give a chance. Are there any more questions that people have before we do a wrap? Bernie, you looked like you were gonna. Oh.
Well, maybe I'll just do my wrap. RAP. Well, I appreciate Laura and everybody else, and the questions were great. We're going to keep working on it, and there may be I'm appreciative of the work that goes on. It's been Sandy came up with a term this year when we were canning tomatoes. Her twos kind of looked like Z's. And so there was on the cans 2020, but it also looked like Zozo, Z-O-Z-O. And, it's been a Zozo kind of year with loss and political dysfunction and COVID. So it can always get worse.
Yeah.
But,
boy, haven't we learned that.
We're hoping for the best, planning for the worst. But yeah, anyway, thank you. I appreciate you doing this, and keep me on your list unless, I really offended somebody today, which I don't think I did. It's good to see you all. Thank you.
That's possible. So without any other questions popping up, I wanted to send you all off with a little holiday cheer. I haven't tested this, so this might be just a complete bust, but I'm gonna turn my camera around unless anybody has. January 20th is the next Coffee and Conversation from 8 to 9. And Christina, remind me what the topic is. I've just, again, not committed it. Do you remember?
I don't, but I can find out if you give me 2 minutes.
We'll get it out there with some more advance notice. Okay, here we go. So here is a funny thing I like to crack myself up with every holiday season. It's my collection of barnyard critters, and hopefully the sound won't blow you away. And it plays about 10 other songs. all with their lips moving and wishing you a happy holiday. So,
Laura, do you think your son would like that?
you know, our little neighbors next door, 4, 2.5, and a new baby are probably going to be the recipients of this as I pass it along to somebody who will get a lot of joy out of it. It's given me a lot of joy over the years. So, all right, you guys have a wonderful holiday season, blessings, safety to everyone. Really appreciate you all. And we'll see each other next year.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Wendy.
Yeah,
Happy
happy
holidays,
holidays.
everybody.
Okay,
Bye.
take care.
Good to see you, Bernie.
Good to see
Bye.
everybody. Thank you.